right. I'm going to call the meeting to order and start with introductions. So let's go this way.
Gino Grimaldi, City of Springfield over here.
Thank you, sir.
Jeff Sparks, Lane County here.
Mark Pangmore, Lane Transit District.
Mike Eister, Lane Transit.
Rob Handy, Lane County.
David Warren, ODOT.
Savannah Crawford, ODOT.
Betty Taylor, Eugene.
Kitty Beersey, Mayor, Eugene.
Bill Cleanor, Lane County. John Theo, Coburg City Council.
George Kleppel, Alcog.
And Christine Lundberg, I drew the short straw, so I'm chairing the meeting today in the absence of Peter Sorensen. Next on the agenda is September meeting minutes. Do I have a motion for approval or anything? Remove? Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, next on the agenda is any adjustments to the agenda. So are there any adjustments? Gino?
I was wondering, since the ACT is an important move forward for the region, if we couldn't get an update from Lane County about their discussions regarding the ACT.
Go ahead.
And then this might be an adjustment for next month in that I'd like to have George and others schedule 15 minutes for a discussion around coordination between the RTP and TSP updates. We can get that on the schedule for next month. That would be important.
All right.
Okay. Does somebody from the county want to address the update on the ACT, since it is?
Sure.
It's in
Can
the.
I take that now?
Yes.
Well, I'll take a stab at that, and Commissioner Fleener can pitch in if he wants to. Folks may know that the legislature passed, I believe it was Senate Bill 944, that mandates that Lane County submit an ACT proposal to the Oregon Transportation Commission in the fall of 2010. So we're underway at the county working on what we're going to do and how we're going to partner with all the stakeholders around Lane County who are interested in this important formation. So we've had several work sessions on this, and the current status is that we have put out a request for some proposals from some contractors here in the county. We're interested in hiring a facilitator / consultant to look into what forming both a pre-act and what an ACT charter might look like. So we're underway. We're talking with folks in the cities, and you'll be hearing more about this as this will come back to us in a couple weeks as we actually hire this person or contract firm. And we'll see a lot of action over this over the coming months ahead. We're interested in this approach, begin as we mean to go on, and to include folks and get the best ACT possible. And we've got a lot of information from ODOT around what they've learned around all the various acts around the state, and we want to have the best ACT possible. And we're going to be rolling up our sleeves to do that.
Well, can I ask a question? Are you looking at what the other acts are doing and the ones that are working well and getting
absolutely
all of those, so that you're taking those into consideration to keep this kind of in a good time frame?
Yes, we'll have this together. So when the Oregon Transportation Commission will be coming to our area next fall to have a meeting and meet with us as we submit this. So we're confident that this process and timeline will be reached.
Okay. Yes.
Just as a follow-up and add-on, during one of our recent Board of County Commissioners outreach sessions, where we met with the West Lane County City Alliance in Junction City, and the small cities present were Junction City, Bonita, and Florence. This was the first agenda item discussed, was the ACT and how the small cities were going to be represented. So we spent perhaps a good 20 minutes discussing the governance structure of how this ACT will actually be assembled who will be on the act, who will have seats at the table. Many of the small cities obviously are very interested in being at the table, either individually or having some sort of representation as a group. So we need to make sure that the small cities' voices are also heard in the process. But other than that, Commissioner Handy's synopsis was excellent.
Any other questions? Okay. Next on the agenda is comments from the audience.
None had signed up a few minutes ago, but perhaps, have there been any sign-ups? Thank you.
No? Okay. Number 5, Metropolitan Cable Television Commission, Milo Meacham presenting.
Just as a reminder, this piece of the agenda not related to the MPO responsibilities is Eugene, Springfield, Lane County is the basic policy body for the Cable Commission work.
Madam Chair, members of the Commission, I'm here to complete the process, if the Commission is willing, with regard to the distribution of some capital expenditures for the PEG system. Brief overview: the new franchise between Comcast Cable Television System and the Eugene, Springfield, and Lane County calls for $100,000 in capital expenditure money for the PEG system. The Commission has decided that would be distributed $50,000, which is the traditional amount that has been received in the past, would continue to go to Metro TV to support the governmental side of the system, and an additional $50,000 would be available for the public and educational channels and the public safety government channel to make some capital improvements in those systems. That money was made available, met with the Commission 2 months ago, and the Commission set up a process for the distribution of that funds, which was essentially to request proposals, review the proposals for their practicality, and then bring a recommendation to the Commission. We did that. We received 2 proposals, each one for a little over $20,000. So as a total, they don't add up to the entire $50,000 that's available. Both of the proposals were reviewed for their technical adequacy, and the conclusion of Robert Lewis, who runs the Metro TV, is that they were technically feasible, and the equipment that was designated was adequate to do the job. There's some of them include technologies that are not strictly cable TV related, but they're closely associated with that. And so he's not passing on the technical feasibility, for example, of building the computer that the public access channel wants to build, but generally it will work. So because they're both technically adequate, and because together they don't add up to more money than is available, what we're recommending is that the Commission approve both applications, authorize us to go forward with a purchase and complete the process to get the equipment for these groups. We wanted to add about $1,000 for each one of the applications for the expenditures because, for example, the proposals didn't include the shipping costs, and we think there will be some of that. So we wanted a little bit of extra money in there. We'll still be under the $50,000 that's available. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
I'd like to move approval of the staff recommendation.
Second that.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, there you go. Thank you very much. Okay, next on the agenda, number 6, Metropolitan Planning Organization, MPO issues. The Advisory Committee. Hey. Hi.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's always a pleasure to be here. And when I can go see myself on TV, when one of you comes up on TV, the name is there and your agency, And so I'm sitting there and doing whatever it is I do, and the name came up, and it said, Kathy Wiederhold, Lane County. That's the name on the form, so I apologize to Kathy. I left my hair for longer. We had a meeting on September 16th, that is, the Citizens Advisory Committee had a meeting, and we had 3 large topics: the STPU framework, point-to-point solutions update, and recruitment of additional committee members for the term beginning next year. And Paul Thompson had given us a briefing back in June. I referred the membership to that briefing. I believe we will have a reissue of that because it was pretty thorough and most of us forgot about it because that's what happens when you get old. But staff is keeping us provided with information, and we will make a decision. I made one suggestion, and everybody threw things at me because I said instead of the 10, 25, 65, I said 30, 30, 30, and 10% for CAC, but people didn't like that. So we will come up with a good recommendation, and I had a concern about where that percentage had come from, the 10, 25, 65, and I had asked about that at the joint meeting, and staff wasn't sure. I thought it was based on statistics, and Commissioner Handy explained that he had been at the meeting when it was decided. Staff had provided all the information and all the statistics, and he said, in effect, that the percents were a compromise among the members of the MPC at the time, although I think he used the word horse trading. So I was reassured that those percentages are not set in concrete, and based on staff information, we'll come up with a recommendation that we will make to you at the appropriate time. Connie did a really nice presentation. She always does on what used to be called commuter solutions. It's now point-to-point solutions. We've got a lot of bus people, alternative transportation people on the CAC, and this is helpful to them and all of us. And one of our people was appointed. Gary Gillespie was appointed to the LTV board, so we feel proud. The last item is the recruitment, and there are 2 flyers, and I'm going to pass these out, not in color, but these are really, really good. And take one, and if you know anyone who might fit in on the committee.
Or if you have someplace to post them.
Or post one somewhere, right.
We're passing around Spanish and English versions.
And so what we're going to do is we have a subcommittee that will look at addition. We've done some of this by email, and we will look at other means of publicity, and then we will get together and review the applications. And the subcommittee people are myself and Wendy Butler-Boyce, who is the CAC co-chair, Diana Aldridge, Commissioner Handy, Bill Morganti, and Edward Winter. And Kathy handed me this morning this LTD brochure, and there's this recruitment information in here. And this is a very fine brochure, and I appreciate having it, but I'm really glad to see that we have the cooperation with one of the local agencies in getting some more people. So this was a light presentation today. So if you have any questions, be happy to answer them.
Questions? Comments? So thank you so much to you and to the committee for continuing to bear with us and go through all of these processes. And this looks very nice. It's simple, which is what I'm always looking for, is people might actually read it, because there's not too much government stuff on it that you might actually be interested in participating. So
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Okay, next on the agenda, we have 6B. Oh, no, Yeah, 6B, planning calendars. Andrea.
There are 3 calendars in the packet this month. The 3-month calendar that we revise on a month-to-month basis. Things to point out on this. At the bottom, actually, there's some pretty critical dates. We have the schedule for the MPO Greenhouse Gas Task Force that Councilor Zelenka is representing the MPC on. They're starting next Thursday, and there'll be 2 meetings in October, 1 in November, and then their final meeting in December. We also we have representatives attending the Super Act meeting in Salem later this month, at the end of the month. And we also will have a transportation land use component at the LCDC meeting that is going to be held here in Springfield. Other than that, I think we're pretty much tracking the other items on the CAC and MPC calendars, and the STPU framework will remain on there until January.
Ms. Reiner, I want to commend staff for their work that they did in preparation for the Oregon Transportation Commission visit recently to Eugene. They did a really good job on a short timeline with helping put together elements of that meeting that would address some local priorities. Given we've got a little bit more time, what are some of the thoughts around developing an agenda for LCDC around some joint time together with electeds and some things that would address staff interest, jurisdictional interest, and elected interests?
Well, there will be one item on the agenda that is transportation-based, so we're just putting together material for that presentation. For organizing the overall schedule, that's actually coming out of the local jurisdictions planning directors. So I believe they each have staff that are working on that, and LCOG does not have a role in putting that together. So I would go to those staff. I know Kurt Yider at the City of Eugene has been involved with it, and I believe someone from the county, and Greg Mott from the City of Springfield.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes?
So I'll just say that the 11/17 calendar is updated. This is the second quarter publication of the 12-month planning calendar, and I've got a new color copy up on the wall. We've been trying to keep that in front of you at these meetings. Not a whole lot got added when the 3 months rolled in. Continuing progress on RTP components, and we do see because of the delay in the 2010-2013 state transportation improvement plan at the top of the chart. It's actually going to almost track with the 2012-2015 program. So that'll get on your schedule pretty soon. But we don't have a final schedule from ODOT that we're prepared to kind of put here in concrete as it may be. And so that's a draft sometime in late 2010.
This relates to something coming up later, but this might be more appropriate to ask now, in that we have the Governor's Task Force on greenhouse gas emissions, and we've set up Councilor Wiley and Councilor Zelenka, who's not here today. There's a fast pace to these meetings taking place, and some of the coordination that needs to happen between the electeds on the committee, the staff who are going to be doing a lot of great work, and MPC, who, of course, not only is interested, but will be supplying input on a calendar level. And what is the thinking around that this is going to be happening in between MPC meetings? It'll be done in a couple months, and what are some of the mechanisms for all this communication that needs to take place?
Well, that's why the staff and MPC subcommittee was put together. That this group, there's a item on the agenda later this afternoon, but the subcommittee is charged with trying to do that coordination, and I've just maintained a standing item for that greenhouse gas task force to come to these meetings and be able to provide whatever information they have at the time. For example, at this meeting, when I put the material, when we put the MPC packet together, we really had very little. Since then, we have a document that I'll share with the committee later, and the schedule of those meetings and a membership list of who's on the committee. But it will be those ongoing staff meetings with Councilor Wiley and Councilor Solenka, and then I will be responsible kind of for bringing that back to the MPC table, but staff at your individual jurisdictions are kind of charged with making sure that gets back to either the Board of Commissioners, Eugene City Council, and Springfield City Council, Coburg City Council.
Can there be a summary, short analysis opportunities posted on our listserv so that we've all kind of got the same information, since this is going to be happening really quickly, maybe after each one of these 4 meetings?
I think that we could provide updates with the material that we receive from the task force. We can put that out there. These 2 documents that I'll share with you today, and hard copy can be sent out in an email on the distribution list. They're all, public information, so we can send that out, and subsequent documents that we get.
Commissioner, on the listserv issue, would you like maybe to all, should that be sent to all of the policymakers within the MPO area? Is that your...
Yeah, I think some of the principles here is it's fast-moving information. I'd like to have an analysis maybe more than all the documents.
Right.
And in real time, rather than reports to each of our jurisdictions, which might not all be unified, that if there's some central place where we could have a distinct analysis about what's going on and or information, then we can also deal with that in each of our jurisdictions as need be.
So, having not been to one meeting yet, I think that probably all of us are just waiting to see what this process will look like, what materials we'll get. So,
well, I'm hoping that we're meeting on the 13th, which is right prior to when Ellen will go to Salem for the first meeting, and I'm hoping then that we will set up a coordinated meeting schedule, so when Alan goes to Salem and comes back, then we'll meet with him. And then we will have information to share. And I think we can give you the results of those meetings each cycle. So he goes to Salem, comes back, we all meet as a staff and a group here, and we put it out for everybody to know what's going on. And I think that'll keep everybody coordinated, and we'll have to set that up hopefully on the 13th because of our calendars. But and like I said, it is going to be very fast, and yet I think information will be vital to all of us. So.
Yeah, something like a one-pager that could be just a synopsis, summary.
I'm looking and seeing head nods that everybody would like to have something comes out that's a one-page briefing, basically, on the status of the committee. Okay. Through this, yes? Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you, Andrea, for the update. This is the only thing I thought is, could you put the website where these maps are on the map so that when these sort of, I stick them away then, and somebody sees these maps, they know where it is because they're on that. No, just, stick on what website. This is on a website.
The link on the paper.
Okay.
On the paper so that, when we go away then.
Actually, that's a good point because right now they're just buried in MPC packets. You'd have to go to the MPC meeting website. So I think calendars separate.
Yeah, okay. that way other people besides us who get these maps can get to them, or calendars can get to them easily. Okay, good idea. Great. Thank you. Next on the agenda, Andrea, you're again here.
Yes, here. Well, this is a letter of support that our Transportation Options Advisory Committee and Point to Point has brought forward to the MPC requesting approval of a letter of support. This is a project they've been working on a long time in coordination with the state of Washington and statewide rideshare database. So making sure that this is kind of as seamless as possible. Any questions about the program? I believe Connie is right behind me and she can answer any questions, but the request is for approval of a letter of support to go to the OTC.
I'd like to move approval.
Is that what, okay, second?
I just want to say, I appreciate the work, and I'm glad it's moving.
You need a second?
I'm just,
Oh, okay. All right, and Commissioner Henry?
Thank you. I have a couple questions I posed to Ms. Bloom-Williams. I don't know whether she wants to come up and handle these or whether Ms. Reiner is prepared to. But I'm interested, I'm very supportive of this, of course, and this particular avenue of ODOT requesting funding from the OTC, and we lend our support to this. What other avenues or programs or such might we also use this route to access OTC funding? How did this particular item come up and meet the criteria of this avenue for support, and what other things might we be looking at or are we looking at to get funding for our area?
Welcome. Thank you. I'm Connie Bloom-Williams. I'm the program manager for Point to Point Solutions. What we have in this scenario is a rare opportunity with ODOT to be able to access some funds for a program that Metro has been carrying the weight on for a number of years in trying to lead the charge in having a statewide rideshare program. We have statewide rideshare programs in different parts of the state. Not statewide, I'm sorry. We have community rideshare programs in different parts of the state, and they don't talk to each other very well. So what we've been doing and working with Metro, kind of taking the lead, is trying to get a statewide program. If that turned out to working with Washington Department of Transportation and now Idaho as well for a multi-state program, ODOT has stepped up and is willing to take ownership of it and try to take the lead in doing this for our region. And they are able to access, at this point, they're hoping they'll be requesting from the OTC in November money through a STPU transfer for a 2-year program to purchase the software and the rights, licensing rights. We don't have too many opportunities like this, and this is one of the few, the STPU transfer funds is one of the few flexible fundings that ODOT has. So that there's competition for that too. We don't even know that we'll get it. But there are not very many opportunities. Transportation demand management, it does not even show up as a line item in the ODOT budget. It is falls under operations, and at this point they're actually talking about whether or not there's going to be a reduction in some of the funding. So we're looking for project-specific things. Where the state goes in the future is going to be something that we're going to be watching very closely, because there is a lot of support for funding transportation options as a travel demand management strategy. What we don't know is what the revenue is going to look like. The economic outlook is not that great. The other side of the coin is transportation demand management is pretty cost effective. It's relatively low cost compared to some of the other options. So there aren't a whole lot of opportunities out there like this, but this is one, and we just glommed right onto it.
Do our ODOT colleagues want to respond to that question?
No, she's actually accurate. I did want to definitely chime in that there is a portion of TDM in the operations pot of money. So, but you said that, so thank you.
There is.
But we also are having a Super Acts meeting again later this month to talk about the 1013 STIP, and we anticipate that the TDM funding discussion will come up at that time. So.
Thanks.
And I just wanted to point out in the letter where it points out that residents of rural communities are often faced with lengthy commutes in order to make a living or get an education. They face a really different challenge than in the urban areas. So this is an effort to be supportive of folks who have to go long distances to be able to do that in a way that has less impact. So it's very good.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, looking for a motion.
I move approval.
Second?
I think we had a motion.
Oh, we had the motion in second, we just need to vote. Okay, all right. So,
Vote early, vote often.
Yes. All those in favor? Say aye. Opposed? Okay, there you go. Thank you very much. Okay, next on the agenda, our big item for the day. Andrea, don't move. Here's the PU funding framework that we're hard at work at to get set up for our next funding cycle.
Okay, this is a follow-up. We talked about the schedule and format for the process last month. Today, we're bringing forward a draft assessment of our existing framework for you to kind of take a look at and then build on with your comments and additions to both requests for information, but also identifying strengths and challenges that the current framework presents. We will also follow up with the same kind of discussion at the Citizens Advisory Committee. I want to point out that this framework, a lot of times we reduce that conversation to just a discussion of the percentages of 10, 25, 65. That is a portion of it. That's sort of the structure. So that's one question we'll be looking at. But the rest of it is also important, the process, the application process, what we're soliciting, how many applications and how those are reviewed. And another piece of that is the criteria by which those applications are used in evaluating them. So I think staff probably are the worst at jumping to the 10, 25, 65, but I'm going to ask that we keep in mind this is the full decision-making process that we want to talk about and assess. Like I said, the staff initiated the assessment. That's the MPO partner agencies, Eugene, Springfield, Coburg, Lane County, LTD, and MPO staff. And one of the things we did in addition to kind of our initial assessment of more the qualitative pieces, we're trying to put some quantitative data together that just sort of help frame the discussion. There is a memo at each of your places and at the back, I believe, providing some further clarification about Table 3 in the document on page 5. It presented budget information that was very kind of confusing and misrepresented the planning budget. So we will make those changes in the final document and make sure we're all clear on what that is showing. So our assessment really looked at, I think the flexibility is kind of the overriding factor that we looked at and identified as the strength of the current framework. It is, we looked and said it's really allowing the jurisdictions to be responsive to changing conditions from a year-to-year basis due to funding issues or funding opportunities. We are doing work at a regional level. We're really kind of doing a lot of different projects, and you know, you can just take a look at it and each person will make their assessment, but there is a significant portion that is funding the alt modes. You know, we'll all have different assessments of whether that's balanced, but the staff team did feel that a balanced set of projects and and programs are reflected in the current framework. When we looked at really the challenges, we didn't come up with anything that really struck us as a weakness, because that flexibility really allows us to bring forward a variety of priorities. So the assessment is saying we don't see a significant drawback to moving forward with the same basic framework for the next period of allocations, which would be the 2011 to 2013. So with that, I kind of want to be quiet and say what I'd like to do is facilitate a discussion with the full MPC for assistance in identifying any of the challenges that you all see, identifying any new directions that we might want to look at. Part of what staff will do is to take those and make sure we have sort of validation from the body as a whole, and then take a two-step process. One is to kind of confirm if the data supports those different perspectives, and then two is to identify any correlation that would have to the framework. Certainly there's challenges in the transportation planning and funding, but it may not be necessarily something that comes out of the way we allocate funding. It may be a different situation. So we want to kind of clarify that, so we're not trying to solve every single challenge with just this one process. So in doing that, I want to kind of just finish my part with the trends that I identified in the assessment. We do see a lot of fairly significant changes in the transportation realm that could affect our need for funding or our priorities, that being things like a brand new transportation authorization bill in the next 12 to 24 months. The jurisdictions are all conducting some pretty significant local planning efforts that can identify local priorities, as well as just changing budget situations at ODOT and statewide, and then any greenhouse gas initiatives that will come forward. So those things, we do want to find a place where our framework can be responsive to those things. So I'm going to do my favorite thing, get up and write on the flip chart, and so kind of try and record the conversation. I'll ask maybe Paul to hold down the fort here and be a good person to answer technical questions about the STP framework process. I'm not allowing you to ask any questions. Are there any questions?
I'll just throw out some comments. And, I would like it if we were able to get to a point where we didn't have a framework that tries to keep us from bumping into each other, but is more about where we have shared interest and priorities as a region. And so I would like to look for the places we all really want to go together, as opposed to the places where we're trying not to get in each other's way. That's just my first thought. And my second thought is that it seems as we make transportation decisions, it would be nice if they responded to some shared goals that we all have. For instance, if we should say that given the need to reduce carbon emissions, given the need to move people fluidly throughout our area, given some of the challenges we have, that we see transit as one of the most important things that we can make happen in this area, does that head up to the front of things that we all try to align some of our decisions under, or reducing our carbon footprint, or supporting land use and transportation decision-making together, since that's part of what we're all doing in all the work that we're about in our community. So if we had some clarity on where we would like to go together, I think it would be easier to look at the decisions that we make that come under that. So I just put that out there for you to think about.
I concur with you. It's just that I would like to have a little more definition of what is regional. Would that include Coburg, Junction City, Veneta, Cottage Grove as we wrap around, particularly as a result of a lot of the commuter activities that connect these smaller cities to the larger cities?
That might be one of the things that you want to clarify, because we're in the midst of a conversation of where we have a smaller group that sits around this table, but certainly the decisions we make affect everybody else, and we're in the middle of that act discussion, so I don't know how we would build that into this, but...
Perhaps define regional to be more inclusive, not exclusive, or at least a consideration of inclusivity with other cities.
Can I just say one more thing, because I'm looking at what she's writing there, and I don't think it captures what I was thinking.
Okay. Well, I guess my response is that I didn't hear anything you said that isn't captured in our goals, but we have such a long list that they get watered down. So I guess I was interpreting it as bringing some of those that we all kind of agree on
up to the top.
So that's why I said that.
Thank you.
So it wasn't really dropping anything out or pulling anything new, but... What is that?
The only other piece that I had was around the first one, because it's not that I'm pointing at people making solos. I think we all have our separate interests. I'm pointing to the opposite. I'm pointing to the opposite of solos, of what we want to do together.
Shared interests,
Shared
priorities,
interests.
and goals.
Yeah.
Solos or silos?
Although they're solos or silos, maybe they're the same thing. I'm not quite sure.
One's for the grain.
No, one silos in terms of...
Did you want to clarify something?
I think it's important to note on the regional definition or aspect of the STPU funding that you cannot spend those funds outside the NPO boundary. So there may be regional goals that we can somehow forward that affect the region beyond the boundary, but we can't actually spend dollars outside of the NPO boundary on the other jurisdictions that are close by.
That's why I captured it as the regional benefit could be used to, well, if it's regional at just the MPO level, or if it has a larger region benefit, it could be a criteria, whether it funds that. Okay.
I just wanted to say that I like the proposal from the staff, the focus on flexibility, and I very much like the mayor's idea of trying to define what our common interests are and working together as opposed to trying to protect each other from each other. It seems like that's a really healthy, productive approach.
Other comments? Questions? Mr. Handy?
Some comments and some questions, and I might ask Ms. Bloom-Williams to join us again also. First of all, just working backwards, I know that this body's expressed interest in having recommendations come to us that are more like our jurisdictional agenda item summaries, where we have a range of recommendations. Staff perhaps prioritizes one of those recommendations. And I'm asking that when this comes back to us, rather than one recommendation from staff, that since this is a rich topic, that a range of options will be developed from these discussions. And if there's a priority recommendation from staff, happy to have that. And I'm looking for that to happen when this comes to us later on. Also want to I want to ask Ms. Bloom-Williams about the TDM program that I know ODOT is now focusing on, least cost planning, and the TDM program has been part of that in my mind, how we get the proverbial bigger bang for our buck around doing some proactive and things up front. And so I want to ask him, what would it look like what would be some of the outcomes if we looked at, say, tripling the TDM commitment or doubling that? You know, we just have a very small piece in our packet here about the TDM program. How would you articulate on a policy choice level here if we decided to change the ratio? What would that do for us?
Well, I wouldn't want to venture this soon on what the outcomes might be, but I can tell you what I think the growth opportunities areas are. And with a little more work and looking at some implementations and projected outcomes, I could probably come back with some more detailed information. But at this point, I think I'm coming in November to give a presentation and an update to the MPC on the point-to-point program.
We actually are planning a November item that would be an update on the program and to tie it into the STPU discussion, the 4 months that we're discussing the framework, what the funding opportunities might be for the point-to-point and TO activities, higher or lower than the 10%, or within, what the range of activities could be supported. So specifically addressing, not to stop the discussion here, but we are going to planning that next month.
The primary areas that I would identify as growth opportunities are providing trip elimination options such as web and video conferencing, telework, encouraging more teleworking through incentives or whatever it might take, so that the trip actually gets eliminated. I think virtual meetings, all those things are just, we're right on the horizon for all those things to start happening. I think another opportunity is impacting personal trip choices at the household level, and very much like a Travel Smart option or a program where you would go in and deal with individual households. And it's a little on the labor-intensive side, but it's not overly expensive to do those kinds of programs. Extremely effective use of funds. And also implementing public education and outreach campaigns. I think that would be very important, and we're just now starting to do that. I think there's also a big opportunity in capturing more people in the ride-sharing and carpooling and vanpooling. And we have made some good headway there, but there's a whole lot more that we haven't tapped into. We also, I think when we look at where the growth areas are, we need to look at, as a region, we need to look at how are we going to incorporate all those into the regional transportation plan. And there has been new energy around discussions around TDM as a strategy for travel management and traffic management and congestion management. So I think there needs to be a little bit more planning on our end if we're going to be more visionary, if we see that there's support to do that. I think there's a lot of motivation and a lot of energy in our community. There's just a tremendous amount. And all these things that we're doing help build community, but they also build a healthier community. And they are going to be able to be in a position to assist the local jurisdictions in meeting any kind of state and federal mandates, whether they're greenhouse gas emissions or some of the other things. So I think that the timing is good to be having these conversations. So the other thing I just want to mention is that after the last OTC meeting, I spoke with Chair Achterman, and she congratulated me on the great level of support that Transportation Options got from our community, and said, but don't forget, we as a state need to be doing TDM at a whole different level. We need to up the ante, and we need to really get out there and be visionary and be innovative. So I think that's part of our course is being plotted right now. So a lot of it will depend on priorities within the region.
Okay, well, if we're going to be exploring this more in November, I will leave that at that and mark the interest in looking at some options for doubling or tripling and what that might look like, and you can perhaps bring that back to us. moving on from there and finding the points of common agreement, I think that's where we want to go. Looking at this chart that has the 6 areas of STIPU funding categories, flexibility is great, and we want to have that. Some of the criteria for me is how do we make sure that we fund critical priorities that maybe don't have other funding streams or not strong funding streams. So as much as we've enjoyed the flexibility in our previous allocation, times have changed. We've got some new and unpredictable things from the last time we did this that have come onto our screen that are daunting us, and one of those would be our commitment to having a bus system that works, that's part of feeding our MX system. I mean, without that those feeders, then there isn't that leg of support. And I'd like for us, again, in that range of options from staff, to look at what if we had a dedicated percentage for the bus part of our transit system. That's a struggle. I'm not sure that's something that's going to get worked out in the next year or so, and flexibility is good, but then it might not rise to the top. And I'd like to suggest we consider prioritizing that within these allocations, and whether it has its own specific percentage base in here so that we do get to that. I'll be curious to hear from our Citizens Advisory Committee and from others how we can get there if that's important to us. And when I think about the integration pieces, as much as integrating land use and transportation is important on least cost planning, I think the public health issues of integrating public health into this, not only when we have an effective transit system do we have less emissions into our airshed, which addresses the public health, but it also will give people the exercise they need to reach those thresholds each day around their own personal public health. And then along with that, we're also achieving some of our density targets by having a transit system that encourages walking and businesses to be near the transit lines. And when it comes to economic development, it's not just about jobs that will build new roads, economic development, which has been our historical perspective, but getting people to work. Having a transit system in a tough economy where some people, that's the only options they have to get to work. And so that's economic development and another way for us to look at.
Well, I do think, looking this over carefully, that our framework is well suited for what we need to do to set priorities. And I think it's clear that some of our priorities will be shifting. But I'm feeling kind of like the voice of doom and gloom today, because I'm afraid that revenue forecasts are going to come in lower than ever. I think every jurisdiction is going to be struggling. Traditional funding streams may be severely curtailed. We don't know yet. We don't even know what the federal government's for sure going to do. But I think it's a frightening specter of this issue of reducing budgets while our needs are growing, and especially at this time. All the things you were saying, Commissioner Handy, I think are near and dear to all of us and important to us, that we continue to expand our community in those healthy ways. But we've got some realities to face too, and I think that will impact some of our priority setting as we get down to it. But as far as the framework goes, I think the framework will handle what we need to do.
Mayor Piercy? Yesterday, there was a meeting, a presentation on upstream that was talking about a study that's been done in our area, in the Portland area, on the health implications of our transportation and land use decisions. And so I think the upshot of that is they did a very good job of sort of mapping the connections, and that's a piece that we may want to take a look at. I thought they did a really good job. And the other thing that I heard recently, and I just wanted to throw it in the mix for thinking about, is not only do you want to think about these other areas around us, but some of those areas are going to really affect us. If there's a big port built that sends many more trains our way, then that's a whole, it is a challenge in some ways, and it'll be an opportunity in other ways for us that will need to be taken into consideration about some of the choices we make here. There may be some opportunities for using some rail in a different way that we want to be thinking about as those other things move forward. So I guess the other part that's hard but worthy is that connecting the dots. Again, a silo discussion, but nonetheless connecting those dots so that we don't have a whole part of us thinking in one way and another over here, and not seeing the connections and not leveraging the opportunities, which is even more important to me.
I was just waiting for her to...
Yeah, I know you were.
I can write here.
I'm always concerned about looking at a net benefit analysis, that you touched upon this, that as we move forward during very difficult economic conditions, people are going to have difficulty just making a living, let alone paying more taxes to support some of these wonderful ideas that we have. So as we move forward, we need to take a look at the practical benefit or risks to each of these ideas and put it into the concept of a net benefit analysis. Is this actually helping the citizens, or is it actually hindering them? And again, we have timelines, short-term, mid-term, and long-term. And I think that at this particular juncture, with the unknowns due to the economic decline, we should be really focused on not hurting or hindering the constituents by imposing additional burden, either through regulations or through taxes. So again, net benefit analysis at all times is essential from my perspective.
Do no harm clause.
Yes.
I want to
Or do minimum harm.
on both what Commissioner Flinner and Mayor Christie were saying. Sometimes these funds give us an opportunity as a community to achieve something we couldn't do otherwise. And I think that's one of the things you're saying, leveraging this opportunity and taking a chance when we just couldn't do this project, X project, without these funds. So I think that's probably my highest priority.
Commissioner Flinner?
I look at leverage as a fulcrum in a board. And you can have a really solid fulcrum, or you can have a really solid board. You can have both, hopefully. But if your board is not solid and you have a good fulcrum, you're going to break the board. So even though we may have funds, we may not want to leverage them because it may actually cause harm. So sometimes saying no is better than saying yes in some instances. Even though there is money available, it's going to cost us more in the long run. So I think that gets back to that point.
It depends on how bad their community needs whatever project it is, if it's something that we've all been trying to achieve.
I actually have a question that goes back to our percentages, because we're having a percentages conversation about we spend more, we spend less, we have TDM, we have etc. I'm looking actually at your table number 1, and I'm looking at our projects which technically have 65%. Our planning is supposed to be 25%, TDM is 10, and actually the projects are 64. So we bumped the percentages anyway, yes? Without, I mean, we didn't stick completely to that.
What that reflects is the fact that over the 6 years of reporting here, we actually had a different percentage in the earlier years. So
I think Paul wants to speak to that.
These numbers are over the timeframe since we've been doing STPU programming, starting in 2004, and for the first 3 years, we had different percentages. We had 10, 20, 20, 50, and I can explain what that was, but the point is, these numbers aren't going to match up to the current 10, 25, 65, because that's only been half of the time frame.
So, but keeping that in mind, if we were to kind of keep with the percentages we have, it's still within that framework. We could move a little bit with it, because I'm looking at flexibility as a key component to being able to be responsive to changing times, changing economic conditions, changing new ideas about how we go about dealing with our transportation issues. And if we stick with with that basic theme of flexibility, can we or can we not, I want to say almost on a yearly, you can take a look at how you're spending it. We do that with our CDBG money in Springfield, that we actually have a set aside for downtown, because downtown's a priority right now. But we, on a yearly basis, renew or not renew what that is and change it. So if you have the ability to kind of move within the framework, that we can maybe not necessarily have to change it so much as have a recognition that this year we want to prioritize this particular scenario, because you may have a new industry coming in, you may have a port going, you may have something that in fact you need to be responsive to in that same period of time. So I'm looking a little bit at that, and I still love LTD, and until we have 10-minute buses, doggone it, that's still the biggest holdup to me, is when those buses are 10 minutes. I still hear from my own, kids that depend on the bus, that takes 2 hours to get somewhere, and they're using MX in the middle. So that's the kind of discussion I'm hoping to have, when we have what needs to work, is that we can get people there. The bus doesn't run at that hour, it doesn't run on that day, it's every hour on that day. I can't even begin to think to go to work for a shift somewhere and actually get there. So part of it, I want, in looking at that, that's what I would want to look at, is maybe routes is part of it, but time is part of it, and see some numbers. If we were to get those buses back and forth, not even looking at routes, just looking at time, what would that take to make it more feasible for people to actually not have to be at the bus stop at 5 in the morning to get to work by 8? That would actually help that scenario. So that's a little bit of what I would want, but still maintaining that flexibility, I think, is...
And now that I better understand your observation on that, the answer is yes. And the best example may be that over the entire time we've been doing STPU, the TO has been at 10%, but we've programmed between 9 and I think at the high end 13 to 14% in 1 year for that purpose, because as we've looked at the individual need in that year and at the program budget, that was the recommendation, and that's what indeed you programmed. So yes, there is flexibility around those percentages.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Handy.
Paul, I have a question coming up from you, and I'm looking at the chart on page 7. And yes, my goal is to find a point of common agreement, and to also flesh out the dichotomy between it's worked for us before, don't change it, and leadership in trying times requires us to look at some different ways of doing what we've done before. And for example, the TDM program has a lot of promise for leveraging the outcomes we want to have. And I want to follow up on Commissioner Fleenor's comment about the net benefit analysis. Paul, could you, in that net benefit analysis mindset, when I look at the projects going back to '04, other than the thought that, well, the jurisdictions prioritize this, we decided to do it, the projects are done, so we checked them off our list. What else might have gone in, or how would we look at what we've done and spent money on, and what's our net benefit analysis? How would you look at this list and give us a summary net benefit analysis, or if we're going to do a net benefit analysis around how we fund projects in the future, since that's coming up in our greenhouse gas emissions discussion, how do we analyze and set benchmarks for this?
I'm not sure that I can respond directly in the moment to the historical questions, but I think that's a good thing for staff to take starting this afternoon and next Monday at a meeting, to look at a suggestion around the net benefit analysis and try and give some sort of suggestion on how we would look at that and test it against what we've done. I mean, that's the best thing we could do, is we could say, okay, if that's how you want to look at the projects, or if we have a recommendation for how we'd look at them from that perspective, let's test it against what we've done in the past and see how it plays out. I don't know how to answer that in the moment. I'd want some input from the group. I do know that in '06, when we established the current framework, one of the things that MPC directed us to do was take away the rigid scoring and point system that we had prior to that, and put in place a number of criteria for staff and MPC to think about, and among those were criteria that said, what are the lost opportunities of not doing it? And also, frankly, the leveraging was considered a benefit analysis, part of the benefit analysis. What other outside dollars will this bring in that we can make use of? And it was also looked at in the leveraging in terms of not being too costly to leverage. We encouraged, in 2006, we started encouraging only projects over $200,000 applying for these funds, because the smaller projects incurred too much overhead in the use of these funds, because there's certain ODOT and FHWA hurdles you have to typically jump through, and processes you have to go through that lay a certain amount of overhead on the use of STPU funds. So those are some of the things that come to mind. We'll certainly come back to you and try and address that better, though.
Make sure of clarification. This list is, mostly it's the projects, and so you don't see things listed out in terms of what other solutions, products or planning products. This is pretty, this is really focusing much more on the 65%. So again, our scheme of things is really the 100%, and we need to be looking at how each one of those types of programs are performing, and again, to compare a PDM type program or a planning type program with capital projects, paving, preservation, it remains a challenge for, and one reason why we have the current structure, I believe. I just want to kind of do a little process check. What I'm really trying to focus on are the issues that really are the challenges with the current framework, certainly challenges with our entire sort of funding process. So that's how I've been recording them. Some of the solutions and ideas are valid, and we're recording those. But first, we really want to get a sense of what haven't we been accomplishing in the past? What could we accomplish in the future if we had some sort of different framework? If we get that information, then staff is definitely charged with coming up with a recommendation or a set of options to recommend to the MPC. That first draft would be at your November meeting. So I just want to, I think I clearly got sort of the shared interest as a way to sort of put a sort of priority level of criteria on things. I have the regional piece, even the larger region, as potentially a prioritized criteria. I have a public health potentially as a criteria. I thought I heard an economic development one, and I put it down, so I have a question mark on that. So those are kind of some criteria pieces. The others, your question about what more could we do with TDM, to me it's like, what are the things we're not funding well? And of course, it was easy for us to say, everybody needs more funding when it comes to preservation. The numbers are enormous. The
new charges for planning and things. We need more funding everywhere. So it's trying to get direction from this body. Is this the priority? What direction would we go to find a spot for that TDM in the budget or transit? But these are, I have to say, when I put this here, I'm going, are we identifying that problem as a group, that we are not adequately funding transit with the SDPU, and we're not adequately funding TDM with the SDPU framework? And if so, that we present a recommendation that addresses that.
I'd like to maybe talk about the conversations that happened just a little bit. When we talk about net benefit, I think it's a little different when we talk preservation, because that's an easier calculation. You can actually show, what's happening by avoiding the preservation, and then kind of tagging on to the comment about where the needs are, just add that the preservation need is significant, and we shouldn't ignore that.
Mayor Piercy.
Well, it seems to me if some of our overarching goals end up being reducing the amount of traffic, that gets you to what you're doing to accomplish that with a TDM discussion. And if your overarching goal is about being able to move people efficiently and effectively and at the same time reduce traffic, then you're in and make it work well for people. You're definitely into a transit discussion on many levels, and how high does that rise in accomplishing our overall goals. So I can see both of those as things that we talk about in many ways, but how we're going to choose to go after those, and are those the top things we're trying to do, that's another discussion.
So the answer kind of is more TDM, but the question or the challenge is reducing traffic and trips.
Commissioner Fleener.
I believe inherent in any conversation about moving people and reducing greenhouse gases should also be a discussion on densification, which leads to land use, which we are now talking about connecting with the Act. So that all of these things need to be integrated into one master package, so that instead of doing this silo by silo, issue by issue, we need to take a look at this as one larger, more holistic approach, and take a look at it from that level versus these individual components, so that ultimately we are accomplishing the goal as efficiently and effectively as possible in one fell stroke versus all of these smaller little brush movements.
Okay. I think he was up first.
Mr. Handy?
Thank you. And because Andrea has an outstanding question about what the economic development idea might mean, I'll just follow up that much as we're talking about the analysis, the cost-benefit analysis as being one part of what's the vision. How do we have a comprehensive look at all that? I just wanted to note there that I think sometimes in our net benefit analysis of the economic development, we've tracked, well, how many jobs is it creating, building new projects, where the part I wanted to create an umbrella is how many people are we facilitating getting to their jobs so they can have jobs, and how is our system facilitating that?
Well, I think, we're not ready to start setting our priorities yet, but anyway, there's a tendency, and I hate being the one to say this, but when we have a resource like this, a funding, it's a tendency to want to say, wouldn't it be nice if we could have this and this and this and this? Let's spend our money for what we envision be the best for our community. And yet, someone has to say, yeah, but we have a household budget, the nuts and bolts. If we don't preserve the surfaces of our streets we have, I'm not talking about building new ones. If we don't do preservation, it's going to cost us millions and millions and millions that we don't have. And one of the 3 years I've been on the council, one of the things I've learned is the cost of sewers and streets and stormwater preservation, and, these are nuts and bolts, and we have to continue to pay the household budget as well as do our visioning. Anyway.
Mayor Pearson?
Totally agree with that. I mean, I think that is a priority for us to take care of what we've got and not let it deteriorate and become more and more expensive for us, which is what we've all experienced. So I think that's true too. So I certainly agree with that. But we got to do all those.
Yeah,
all those things.
Reality.
Yeah, reality, and then keep moving forward. I think both of those things. And I will say that we've been doing a lot of interviews for committees and commissions for our council, and if you really listen to everybody who's applying for those committees and commissions, they almost all say the same thing. They really want to see people working together in a common direction, and they really want to see something that they think is going to have some economic benefit to our communities in a way that preserves the things that we care about and allows us to have the livability that we all cherish here. And that's what people really deeply care about. And I think in the economic analysis, you not only have to think about how you get people to places and make sure that they can get where they need to go, or that you provide jobs, but you also have to calculate how much you won't have to spend if you take care of your infrastructure, how much or what decisions you can make that will, over time, save you a lot in terms of building more roads or in terms of how we move people from place to place. So all those things have to sort of be in the calculation.
In our calculus of whether to preserve or not, it should not be a foregone conclusion that every project should be preserved. There should be a point in time or a point in the list that particular project is no longer efficient or effective, and we may want to have a capital project that may change the direction that particular project is headed. So instead of saying that it's just a foregone conclusion that all projects should be preserved, I think we need to make a prioritization list and take a look at a certain point in time. This is not really cost effective. It's not really doing the work it was supposed to do. The demographics have changed, the traffic load has changed, and we may want to reroute it with a different road or transportation modality. So I agree with preservation, but I don't think that it should be foregone that everything should be preserved. So that should be the caveat.
I want to interject a little bit of process check here, that when I'm looking for a head nod, that you have information that you need to go forward, any more clarification, and it looks like you're divvying it out into 2 groups. Ones that are basically our framework pieces, right, and one that are more, how are we going to divvy out money pieces?
Well, frankly, you can say how we're going to divvy up money, but it's really what are the priorities and the policies of this committee that's speaking of how that happens. And again, in this context of allocating STPU funds and determining the framework decision-making process. So, how much time do we have? Do we have any time?
We're pretty,
6 minutes. So I guess maybe with the remaining time is to look at some of most of these things are, to me, improvements to the current system that we can add. What it reflects is more staff work, more kind of some intensive level of analysis that we will look at and see how that can be addressed. But frankly, what I see coming out is some of the classic TDM transit preservation, modernization, and unless we're going to, sort of, how does this group want to address the fact that all of those programs are kind of wanting to do more, and there's not anybody jumping up and down and say, please give me less money for this. It's not answering it today, it's how would best staff support us getting to a recommendation by next month. Not in the percentages, but how we're going to look at that.
Right here.
Well, just when I think about what's happening right now with all this coming down from us, both nationally and at the state level on carbon emission reduction, that our own community action plans for dealing with these things, I guess it's what will get. Maybe our priorities have to be based somewhat on what will get us furthest, soonest.
That effort.
And maybe as a second piece, Andrea, is within our framework now, I'm looking at a lot of what's there that probably already exists within the current framework. So how can we use that framework so that we don't have to basically recreate the wheel?
Right.
What is already there?
How can,
just to more maybe redefine it a little bit, but not necessarily have to say, okay, we're just wiping the slate clean and we're starting again. That much of this is already, because you just said we see modernization and preservation, all of the things that are already there. That maybe we have criteria that is quite adequate right now, and we just need to take a refresher look at some of it that would cut down on the staff time in terms of trying to put new pieces in the framework.
so I'm kind of thinking that one of our recommendations could be is a set of criteria that we already use, and within that maybe what like a tier 1 or something like that. So that could be one of our options that we present. So we use existing criteria, but prioritize and maybe refine.
And maybe for the group as a whole, everything that's on the list is a thumbs up, so that, or a thumbs down, yes, so that we, we set, because the staff is going to leave with this list and expect to come back next month with everything done. So, is there anything else? Staff's going, sure, we can do this, it's a piece of cake.
Well, I mean, when you're asking if we're getting what we need for what I'm sensing personally is sort of two things. One is at the framework level, the 1025-65, I see some discussion around looking at increasing the percent or funding of TDM, which would affect that framework. I haven't, there's been some discussion, but I'm wondering if that's direction from the group to do that, or if that's something the staff should put a lot of time into analyzing. And we have talked about next month having already a presentation scheduled about what that might look like. Another one is the transit. There was, again, an individual or perhaps a couple of members suggesting, should transit have a silo, if you will, or a set-aside percent? And if the group wants to direct that, then we could bring back to you next month some of what that would look like. And then a lot of the rest of those up there, to me, get to the other part of the framework, which is how do we evaluate things? What are the priorities? What are the factors that we'd like you to think about as you look at projects being submitted or funding things within the framework?
I just wanted to offer up I don't know whether it's a set-aside or how we approach it, but I don't think transit is separate from any of the other things that it's part of everything that of the way we accomplish everything we're talking about. So then within that we have to figure out what is it that we think we can get the best advancement through trying to prioritize. Right now we'd like to prioritize everything, but that won't get us very far. So I just would hate to see that sort of separated out as choose transit versus everything else. I think it is part of everything else.
I'll go back to Commissioner Handy's comment at the beginning of the discussion and his request for some alternatives to be brought back. I think that would be the best thing for staff to do, is come back with some alternatives for a more in-depth discussion. You've just scratched the surface of some pretty significant policy issues that come out and say, well, we've adopted this direction at this point in time. I think would be premature. So go back to the alternatives for the next one.
And that's what I was
And our alternatives, again, will address those three pieces of the decision-making, both the structure, the process, and the criteria. And I think we made a really good run of criteria here.
And next month, we will have more folks at the table, too, that aren't here today. So we're going to have not new discussions so much as it will get revisited anyway. So is that, you're okay?
With our discussion, if there are other pieces of data or analysis that this group would like to kind of get to this, let us know. Because we want to have sort of, like I said, a qualitative piece of what we heard from staff and NBC and CAC, but we want to have sort of accompanying data that helps the decision process.
So, Commissioner Handy.
Yeah, I think most everything we're interested in is on here, so a good job with capturing that, and I appreciate the discussion, and I'll be interested in, Paul mentioned staff will start looking at that net benefit analysis and how we can bring that into the discussion, and I think it would be healthy to have, as policymakers, to have some policy options to discuss. So whether that's an option that doubles the TDM, we can have that discussion. If there's a piece that's dedicated to transit, bring that to us for discussion, and if we reject it at that point, I think that's part of this process that's healthy, so we're doing our due diligence around what different scenarios might look like. It's not reinventing the wheel, but it's some tweaking.
So, but can I get with it? We're going to have a TDM presentation anyway next month, yes?
I'm planning that for the next month's agenda, yes.
Okay, so if we had that as maybe a pre-moment before we have a further discussion about that, rather than make it, a separate part of you have to do separate work.
We'll integrate it with this.
Integrate it with that. So is that okay with everyone? We do it that way. All right, so are we in agreement then about the direction, and the staff is comfortable with what we're doing, and you will have 4 or 5 options for us, and we're just going to be great. Okay.
A menu will be at your plate.
The price list.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you to everyone for this. It's been a very productive conversation here. So, to keep us moving along here, the task force, we actually have a separate item for the greenhouse task force, which has come up
I
several
have
times.
to hand out, this is a summary of the task force interviews, process recommendations by the consultant working for ODOT and the governor's office for the task force. It's a draft, and so participants are looking at this and providing comments this week, but and that's something I can send out in email. We just got that this week. Also, the schedule, meeting schedule, and the membership list of the task force. Pass that out as well. And since we talked about sort of the staff part of the process, I just thought if Councilor Wiley had something she wanted to add to what you might have heard or the staff discussion from October, but it appears that since there will be 2 October meetings, we will have a much meatier MPO greenhouse gas task force report next MPC, I would imagine.
Yeah, to me, it's just, it's a matter now of, we're going to have our pre-meeting where I think we want to talk a little bit about our nuts and bolts process locally, and then we'll be really waiting for the first meeting for what Ellen brings back.
Yeah.
And I think that'll be what kind of feed what we're going to put together for everyone else.
And there will be a staff team going up as well, so we can try and extract that information quickly too, and get that out. So that's all I had. Again, this is a standing item, probably till January and beyond.
A discussion is only a little bit earlier, so everyone's okay with this. This was really information only. Yes, Commissioner Handel.
Yeah, I'd like to highlight something which kind of grows out of our previous conversation, in that, we're at a crux point in our history and our evolution, and again, as leaders, not just in this community, but now an opportunity at the state level to answer the question of, do we start planning now around this, or do we put off doing this for 5 years or longer? And I think it's important that our reps and our staff look at what we can do now, rather than waiting for an unspecified period of time. And given that, with the nature of funding sources, and we talked about flexibility in our last conversation, that much like the TDM program is finding a challenging spot to find a classic place to get funded from, part of why we need to be very assertive and aggressive with this conversation now is because there aren't going to be probably won't be automatic funding sources to help us integrate or identify and do projects that will address these pieces. So I think there's two pieces, is not only looking at the flexibility, but our commitment to finding funding sources, but also to be assertive in saying, let's plan now for this so that this gets on our screen with staff, with administration, with policymakers, so we can be proactive on behalf of our community and our commute sheds.
Mayor Piercy.
I just want to add to that through another planning process we not so long ago went through, there is a way of looking at these things where you think about what can be done in the short run and then what's the long-term vision, so you can start chipping away at some of the low-hanging fruit kind of thing, because we're doing it anyway, and there might be some additional leadership and guiding that could come across the state for that we could do in fairly short order, and should try to get, and people will feel like we're moving, and nothing makes people do more than the success of getting something done. So I too think if they can come up with some short term, and while they're working on the long term and the medium term, that would be really good.
Well, I just think one of the, I'm sorry, okay, I'll just jump in. One of the exciting parts of this, I think, is the fact that we will be able to work in a coordinated effort with the other 5 MPOs in the state, so we can really share their expertise or issues, and that there is the ability, because there are only 6 of us, to really come together effectively and solve these problems, for a statewide response. And part of that, is the Metro has been charged with going forward and getting this done already, that we will be working with them pretty closely on what they're learning, and be able to, share that information pretty quickly with the state folks. So I think that's a good result of this effort.
And just one add-on, this memo that was passed out, I got a chance to review it earlier, actually, and it's pretty exciting that it's not about creating a new wheel. Noting in here that Sacramento Region Blueprint is one of the case studies this task force will be looking at. I know at Lane County we admire what the city of Eugene has done with getting out in front with carbon footprint identification, and I'm looking forward to our talented jurisdictional staffs who have a lot of expertise and interest in integrating some of these issues on how we identify projects that will advance these goals. And that gets back to the analysis that Commissioner Fleener is bringing up. So I look forward to staff and Councilor Wiley and Councilor Zelenka doing a lot of work in a short time, and thank you for doing that.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay. All right. Next is 6F, the MPC meeting location. Motion is presented by staff.
This item we put on the agenda so that we had an opportunity to have a more official discussion about the meeting locations. There was some discussion about relative costs and values of the varied locations. So that we did go so far as to provide a recommendation to schedule the meetings at a single location, really so that there's a fairly consistent ability for the public to know that at 11:30 on the second Thursday of every month, they know where to go, and we really think that will help to get the public more attending those in a more regular way. I think the need to have to check the schedule and the agenda every month is presenting some challenges for folks that for some reason want to come to these meetings. So we put together just a sort of an assessment of addressing the costs and the accessibility issues, and offer that for your discussion and decisions.
I'd like to move that we adopt the staff recommendation to have the meetings at the Baskin Tyson facility.
Second, so we can have discussion.
Second.
Okay. Discussion.
I think it's a great idea.
We discussed this a little bit this week, and a couple of things. I remember we used to have all of our meetings at LTD, and that was kind of a neutral. Yeah, it was a neutral place in the middle, and served us well. But we talked about the importance of hosting and having our citizens being able to attend our meetings. And it's important to our Springfield folks that they get to come to some of our meetings. And not that they can't jump on MX and go to Eugene, but some of them won't. You know, and so we just have some concerns about not hosting.
What if we were to schedule every third or fourth meeting to be held in Springfield so that we can capture the maximum benefits of the Baskin room with respect to the teleconference capability, but at least we're able to get out to Springfield once every third or fourth meeting? Would that accommodate?
Third would be good.
Every third meeting?
Yeah, and Mayor Pearson.
I just wanted to be supportive of, none of us ever knows how many people will actually show up, but it does matter to people that some of the meetings happen in your community, just like in ours, and so I'm certainly supportive of that. It's a little more expensive, but...
Yes. Madam Chair, may I amend my motion to add that every third meeting would be hosted by the City of Springfield?
I'll accept that.
Okay. Well, and I'm just going to make a personal comment about it, because twice now. One, I had to ask somebody at the library for some change because I was parking downstairs, and the other day I came to Eugene and I actually had to make a trip to the bank because I realized I didn't have a bit of change in my car, and doggone it, I couldn't put anything in that meter. And so it is, and I appreciate that, but it is that sort of trying to locate, making it convenient, and that's what we're trying to do here, I think, in the bigger picture, is making it convenient for folks. So I also feel pretty strongly about the hosting, and but that's what we've had a motion and a second now for every third. So any further discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, all right, thank you. And follow-ups. Okay, ODOT. Yes. So you have a ODOT
I have
update?
some information I'd like to share with you, then a couple of reminders. What I'm passing around now is a good visual for Unit 2, Unit 3, and Unit 4. Unit 3 and Unit 4, of course, are being funded by the House Bill 2001 Job Transportation Act. I'm not going to read through this, it's kind of self-explanatory. The main points are that Unit 2 is on schedule to be bid February of 10, and Unit 3 is 2012, and Unit 4 is 2014. Unit 4, we have $40 million that we've estimated that we need. We only have $10 million of that provided by the JTA. So our hopes are to get some earmarks to make up the difference of that. Unit 3 at this time, from what we've estimated, is fully funded. And then a couple reminders, Connect Oregon 3 applications have been open for submission since October 1. So we should be seeing some letters of support coming in during our next MPC meeting. And then a reminder also on the Super Act meeting, that's the 29th of October from 1 to 4 in Salem. And the purpose of that is, of course, we discussed the current condition of the draft STIP and the reductions that we've had to take because of the funding issues that we have, and then also to talk about what's being added as far as mod funds from the House Bill 2001. And also, I wanted to debrief a little bit about the OTC meeting that happened on the 15th and 16th, and just kind of go around the table and see if you guys had any comments on how you felt that went.
Well, we really appreciated having OTC here in our area, and appreciated the opportunity to talk with them, and I hope you'll convey that right back to them, that we thought it was a great opportunity. And I guess in particular, I would like to say that there was a presentation on the West Eugene Collaborative, which I think they seem to be fairly interested and excited about, and Matt Garrett spoke up about wanting to work with us as we move forward with some of those ideas. So I think that's a very positive response, and I feel it was a really good meeting. So appreciate it very much.
Okay, great. Well, I can definitely carry that message back.
Come back again.
All right, we sure.
I might just to make a comment. I think the mayor shot it. I think there was a real appreciation of the interest of not only the commission being here, but wanting to have a dialogue with the local officials. They had, I know, a big agenda of statewide issues, but coming down, and then we got to do a tour of BLT. They talked about the collaborative. Yes. So, I mean, that kind of interest is obviously what is encouraging to the local agencies about creating that connection between the commission.
LTD did a great job, and they took them out
on their bus
tour,
tour, and I think that was they like that a lot, and helps them see what's going on here. So went out to the gateway.
And as Connie mentioned, she got to have a conversation with the chair, with Gail Ackerman, and talk about, kind of broader issues. So I think that kind of thing doesn't happen if the meetings are always in Salem.
I think I can speak to the commission on this point, that definitely is their intent, to come down and hear what the locals have to say and make sure that the issues are being addressed by the folks that are down here like myself, and that how things are running. And so that's good to hear.
I think we were all rather repetitive on the TDM thing. I think they heard that from many directions, which was really good.
Okay, well, great. I'll definitely carry that message back.
Thank you, David.
Yep.
Savannah.
Oh, no. You read everything.
Oh, you did everything?
Yes.
Great. That was easy then. All right. Next steps. Who was it that I have? Paul. Yes.
I have one quick update on ERA funding and 3 on MTIP administrative amendments. First, on the ERA funding, if you remember, back at your August meeting, you approved directing staff to adjust Eugene's 4 ERA-funded preservation projects due to potential cost underruns, if you will, on that, so that they could fully utilize those funds on a 5th project, which at that time we identified as East 13th Avenue. And your motion essentially said, directed TPC to administratively adjust that to allow Eugene to fully obligate it to $3 million. I just wanted to update you that Eugene is now working with me to process amendments to utilize any remaining funds on 11th and 13th. Your motion didn't specify 13th, but again, I just want to clarify that it's now 11th and 13th, and so that you all know that we are working to fully utilize the $3 million. A little bit different than what it was in August, but still following the direction. On MTIP administrative amendments, there were 3 administrative amendments that TPC acted on 2 weeks ago. They're not in your packet simply because the major one we needed to make sure was going to indeed be the appropriate approach, and ODOT has since said, yes, that works. So let me just real quickly let you know what those were. The first of the 3 is very minor in that there was an existing closed-circuit TV project that ODOT was doing, and as part of that project there was a $1,000 right-of-way phase that was not needed, so we deleted that from the MTIP. Very minor amendment. The second one is somewhat more significant, and it's good news in that if you remember several months ago you approved using $85,000 of STPU funds to do the environmental work on the South Bank Viaduct bike path under the Willamette River Bridge, I-5 Willamette River Bridge location, and that was also to get that environmental work done in a timely manner, and at that time ODOT had not fully put together the construction funding package, but they have, and so 2 weeks ago we amended into the MTIP approximately $1.2 million in construction funding for that bike path, and it's good to know that that's in place. And then the third administrative amendment, which is related to that specifically, and the one that we had to sort of run by ODOT after the fact to make sure that the approach was appropriate, he would work through all the hoops and hurdles, is that of that $85,000 that you approved in STPU funding for the environmental work, Springfield really was spearheading this effort, as we identified back then, and it wasn't practical or efficient for us to federalize that $85,000, to federalize that phase, the environmental phase. So what we did 2 weeks ago at TPC was that we moved $25,000 of the federal money that you approved, the $85,000, to Gateway Beltline, which is a Springfield project that already has nearly $2 million in STPU funding and was already federalized. And Springfield subsequently moved $25,000 of their local funding from that project into the viaduct. So it was just a fund swap, so that now the viaduct environmental work can go forward with local funding, and we don't have to go through the federalization of that, and it saves a lot of process work. Again, it was just trying to make more efficient use of the funds, but we want to let you know that we moved some of the STPU money from the viaduct to Gateway Beltline. Again, already had STPU funding, was already federalized, so that we could use local funding on the viaduct. And that's it.
Any questions, Commissioner Handy?
Good work, I appreciate it. Could you in the future either include a one-pager in our packet with this, or if it's late breaking, post it on the website with the other agenda materials? That'd be terrific. And
I will post this one. This one, again, we were just making sure that that last piece is exactly going to work, and we normally do have these in the packet, and I will post this one and make sure that it's available.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Thank you, Paul. Okay. That's it, yes?
Yes, I believe so.
Thank you. Thank you.
We've got 8 minutes on the county clock over there.
We're adjourned. Thank you so much.
Good job.